Hello everyone, welcome back to our course. Today we're going to be learning about functions. So we are where we left off yesterday or in the previous video about lets and vars and a little bit of optionals, and today we're going to learn a little bit more and get started with functions. So to get started, just so that we are more familiar with our var, lets, and optionals, we're going to have a optional var, and we're going to have a let variable which we will set to a type of int, and actually let's do a type of double, and we're going to set it as 10. So for floats and doubles you have to give it a 0.0. You can always give it a 10. The program would know, or rather Swift would know that this is a 10 and you want to have type double. So the reason why I want to do two different types is because I want to show you a bit about kind of the differences if we were trying to print a variable plus b variable. So when you're trying to print this, it's going to give us an error because you cannot add between an int and a double. And usually if you're doing in math, you would be able to if you try to add a decimal in an integer. But for code, it has to be very, very specific. So when you're trying to do anything between two different types, you have to kind of bring down some sort of interaction. So here, to be able to print this, we're going to create something called a function. Now, a function contains several parts. The first is the name. Then inside of it, inside of parentheses are parameters. So we can have parameter 1, and every single time you give a parameter, tell it what type. So basically, what you're going to be passing in when you call a function. So, for example, here we're going to do double. And when you do something like this, which is a dash and then for caret, you give it a type. This is basically telling it a return type. Then curly brackets, which is basically what will happen inside of this function. So think of functions more of a action. It's more of a way or method to basically interact between two different objects and ultimately either returning a function or doing some sort of action. So in this situation, we're trying to return something. We could also create a function which has no return. It could be like this, and obviously they give it a different name. So we'll probably do a name no return, and these are two functions. Obviously this is poorly named. Name and name return, it makes no sense. So function name usually means you give a name of what this action is going to do. Here we are actually going to convert double to int, and here we can do a something different. So here we're returning it, so we can do, instead of convert, it will be return, and this one will be convert sorry, can't spell tonight, convert double to int, and we're going to remove no return. So here we are. So we have two different functions. One is returning something and one is not. These are basically two functions that can basically this is one of the ways you can use functions. So yeah, we have function, we give it a name, and we have parameters. You can have more than one. So when you have more than one parameter, you can do a comma, and then we do parameter 2, and we could do a double again. In this situation, we don't want two parameters here. We actually want two parameters in the convert function. So we're going to go here, and in here we give it parameter 2, and in here we're going to give it a double. And the reason why we're doing this here is because we're trying to convert double to int. We're going to tell it that what parameter 1 is going to be the number we're going to switch over to int, and the second one is basically telling it which parameter we want to switch it over to. This is really bad code. Obviously we never really want to use this code, but I just want to give it as a point that you can create functions with multiple parameters. Anyways, we want to use the int one. So here the point of using this function return double to int mainly is so that we can call it here, where we could do return, so return double to int with a parameter. We're going to put it in b variable instead of here, and essentially what we'll do is we will pass in a double, and it'll return us an int, and it'll print out it that way. So obviously here, since we still have another situation which is which we learned before, which is checking whether or not a variable is nil. So we can do two ways. Just as a refresher, we can do it is if a variable is not equal to nil, then we want to print everything here and put a force unwrap. And the other way is to do if let a variable not nil, just because we know it is not nil, we're just basically equal to a variable as we want to do as int, so we do curly brackets here, and we can do print again. Just gonna copy it. Try not to copy code as much. It's not good, but for the sake of this, we're gonna do it here because it's gonna take a lot longer if we don't do it this way. So here we have two functions, perfectly fine. Now we actually do our functions. So here's two ways we can do it. This both should work. So just so we can understand this worked correctly, this is gonna be a nil check. And here we're going to print a if let check. So basically there's two different ways to check to see if the value is nil or not, and if there actually is a value in the variable that we're trying to store. And if there is, then we do this. If not, we don't, primarily because we don't want to force unwrap this ahead of time without knowing if it's nil or not. Primarily because if we try to access it in a different way and it's nil, it'll break the code or break the application you're trying to create. Anyway, so back to your function, return double to int. In here, we're going to have a parameter of a double, and what we're going to return is a int. So Swift has some handy functions on its own, and what we can do is just do return int parameter 1. And this will return parameter 1 as int, which basically is pointless in the sense that in reality, we don't need to create our own function for this. Since Swift has its own, we can really just have done this. Instead of doing this, we could have actually just done this whole time for both, obviously, instead of creating our own function. But for this course, we're trying to create a function, teach you how to do that. So this is how you do it. And to make sure it works, again, press play and see if this works. And again, we should not get anything back because a variable has no information. We did not give a variable a value. So we should put a variable and give it a value. So we can do it here. A variable equals to 10. And if we run it again, we should get 20, and 20 we should get no check, if let check, they both return 20. Perfect. So another thing we can test out here is that the function does not actually have to be up front. It could be anywhere as long as it's within a class, which we will be learning in another video. But for now, we had to put it somewhere. So for in a playground, you have to obviously put it in a certain location before calling it. But if this was in a class, we wouldn't have to, which is something we will talk about in another video. I'm going to put this code back to where it was. We will learn more about kind of hierarchy of code when we use classes in the next video when we start using classes. So obviously this is a really basic kind of implementation on how to use functions. So here we're going to actually create another function, and we're going to call this add, and we're going to do number 1 of int and number 2 of int. So obviously we have a function that adds things, but this is just to show you how you can do this. So to make this easier, so we don't have to rewrite this code twice, so as you can see, we do a variable plus blah blah blah. What we want to do is really just call a function, put in these two variables into it, and it'll return us a value. So again, to do a return value, you just put a dash forward caret and a type you want it to return. And here we're going to return number 1 plus number 2. Alright, so here instead of printing a variable and printing that, we're going to do add a variable, and the second one is return double to int, and this is going to be a b variable. And we can do the same thing up here, except we're going to change it. So actually, instead of copy and pasting code to show you guys that copying code is bad, we're going to do it ourselves. So the neat thing with Swift is that you have pre-fills. So we can do this, a variable not nil, and return a double int b variable. So here we should get a similar thing here. We should still get 20, and the print statements here should be exactly the same. Perfect. So this is really the basics of functions. We can do a bunch of these. You keep creating functions. The point of functions is just for the ease of readability, so that and also the ease of basically being able to reuse a function. Basically, when you do things multiple times, being able to reuse them is much more handy than basically copy and pasting code, as I've shown you a few times before. Copying and pasting gets a little out of hand eventually, and it gets a bit messy. So doing it this way makes it a little bit easier, and it's just a lot easier to read and much easier to reuse functions versus just recreating. So that way, when you get a more complex algorithm, you put into a function, and all you need to do is call that function and it'll handle the rest of the work. And that way also when you do debugs, if there is a bug, for example, where here I put minus, and let's just say you copied and pasted this a line of code that was like 15 times, you don't want to change 15 lines of code from plus to minus. Instead, you just changed it here in one function. Instead of instead of minus, you put it back to plus, and all these functions here is fixed now, versus doing the other way. So just to show to you, if I did minus here and we ran it, obviously we're going to get 0 for both of them. And if we had the original code, which was basically adding it, where we would just be basically printing a variable plus return double parameter b variable, and let's just say I wrote minus here, and just for ease of it, I'm just going to copy it. This is exactly what a bad coder would do here. We would do that, then we would get something wrong, right? So we're going to do, just so that we have an idea of the difference between correct and incorrect, we're going to do that, and we're going to do the same thing up there. So you can see as you get copying and pasting a lot, it kind of gets out of hand, and if it's copying and pasting the wrong code numerous times, you'll end up with bad code. So if I press plus right here and add, and we run it, you'll see that we have the correct functions. These two are correct, while these two are still incorrect. But in order to fix them, I have to press plus here, and then come back here and do plus. And if you have 100 lines of these, it's going to take a while to fix versus just doing it in one place. So I hope you understand and learn a little bit more about functions using Swift. In the next video, we'll be learning more about classes and taking this piece of code and bring it into another level. Thank you for watching, and see you guys in the next video.